I'm Louise Richardson. I chair the selection committee. I'd like to thank the other committee members for sharing their reading enthusiasms. Karen Alpha, Margot Brown, Dusty Hewitt, and Hazel Russell. Thanks also to Card Carrying Books for their support and the church for sharing the space. Book Sandwichin is a program of the Friends of the Library who offer generous funding to our library every year. If you are not a member of the Friends or haven't renewed for this year, you can see Kimberly at the back of the room and she will happily take your money. It's the best deal in town, $5 for an annual membership as an individual or $10 for a family. And it gets you the newsletter that keeps you updated on everything that the Friends are doing, as well as getting you into the book sale on the first day. So you get choice pick. The Friends will be having their annual meeting following this, and we'd love to have everybody stay for that. This week's book is That Librarian by Amanda Jones, presented by Brian Hildreth, Executive Director of Southern Tier Library System. This year, if you were here last week, you know I asked presenters a couple of new questions that I sort of called from the By the Books column from the New York Times. Brian's first library experience that he remembers is attending preschool story time at his local public library in Casanova with his mother when he was 3 or 4. That's almost exactly what Jen O'Hara said last week. So, and we know that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of adults now that would say that after their experience with Miss Sue at our library. I was thrilled when Brian agreed to share his thoughts about That Librarian and its ramifications. I had the pleasure of cheering for him when he accepted the New York State Library Association Librarian of the Year Award at their conference. Like the remarkable leader that he is, he'll tell you that the award really belongs to everyone on his staff and at the 48 libraries in the system. And that's true, but I also can't imagine a more skilled, dedicated, and passionate advocate for libraries than Brian. It's an honor for me to serve on the STLS as an STLS trustee and to work with him on a regular basis. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really good to be here with all of you. And I do want to thank Louise. She kind of fits the trifecta. She's a trustee on the Southern Tier Library System Board. She's a trustee on the Southeast Steuben County Library Board. She's also a trustee on the Foundation for Southern Tier Library Board. Anytime we have advocates that put that much work, time, and dedication into it, we definitely want to give them a round. I also appreciate that introduction. I am going to talk a little bit about myself today later on, just because I do think it relates to the book and obviously the story of Amanda Jones. Before we begin, though, I'd just like to see a show of hands. How many of you actually read the book? And certainly no judgment.
Can we say half the book?
Half the book. You dug into it a little bit. Put your hands up, okay? And I'm going to ask you to keep your hands up for a little bit longer. If you're a lover of books, if you're a lover of libraries, if you're a lover of information, or you're a lover of democracy, please raise your hand. Just wanted to make sure. I wanted to make sure we got to 100%. So, why should we be interested in this topic of censorship? And I'm going to call on folks that I know the names of if I don't hear any answers. I just need like 2 or 3 answers. Why do we care about this topic of censorship?
Freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech. Being able to say what we want, where we want, within the confines of regulations and laws.
We need to have a democracy. We need to be able to talk about all aspects of anything.
Right. We need to dig in. We need to make certain that we have a common understanding. Although we don't necessarily agree, it's extremely important that we have that ability to communicate with each other freely without any ramifications so that we can move forward as a country together. Give me one more.
Education, learning all aspects of everything.
Yeah, I love that. Education. Absolutely. What is it to us as a society where some voices and some stories and some communities are heard where others are not? It's not the full picture of our democratic society. It's not the full picture of the United States of America. And going back to our framers' intentions of the United States of America, it was all about enlightenment, continuous improvement, continually trying to get better from one day to the next. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to quickly read this for you. It comes from the Office of Intellectual Freedom of the American Library Association. It's basically it's the preface of the Freedom to Read statement. The freedom to read is essential to our democracy. It is continuously under attack. Private groups and public authorities in various parts of our country are working to remove or limit access to reading materials, to censor content in schools, to label controversial views, to distribute lists of objectionable books or authors, and to purge libraries. These actions apparently arise from a view that our national tradition of free expression is no longer valid, that censorship and suppression are needed to counter threats to safety and national security, as well as to avoid the subversion of politics and the corruption of morals. We, as individuals devoted to reading, and as librarians and publishers responsible for disseminating ideas, wish to assert the public interest in the preservation of the freedom to read. Okay, directly from the American Library Association's website. I'd just like to share this information. So for those of us that are librarians in the room, this is something that we're very familiar with. It ties into our core values and the work that we do every day. But some folks may not necessarily ever have the opportunity to read that or understand it. And so I think it gives us a good foundation for the conversation that we're having here this afternoon. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a synopsis of this book, and particularly for those that didn't read it. I am going to give away the ending, but it's a nonfiction book, so you can go Google it, and you're going to find out what's going on. Okay. So Amanda Jones, she's a school librarian, not to be confused with a public librarian. She lives in Livingston Parish, Louisiana, just outside of Baton Rouge. She's a leader in her own kind. She's an award-winning librarian. She's the head of the School Library Association of Louisiana. This is the community that she was born and raised in. Like, this is the school district that she grew up in. This is the school that she has found her career in and her voice in. She's doing amazing things. But she hears that there might be a question of the content or displays that are taking place or being viewed at the public library system that she grew up in. So like any good advocate probably in this room who has concerns about freedom of speech and wants to protect those freedoms of speech for all community members, she goes to that meeting. Okay? And this isn't something that just happens in Louisiana. It happens across all the 50 states of the United States. It happens in blue communities. It happens in red communities. It's certainly something that we've been dealing with since 2021 across the United States of America. So she's just doing the thing that a lot of people do on a regular basis. So she goes to that meeting. She gives a very passionate speech. It's in the appendices of the book. You can read through it word for word. And she talks about the importance of freedom of speech. She talks about the importance of sharing different ideas and different viewpoints. She talks about the idea that although you may not necessarily agree with what's in the collection of the public library, and everybody in this room will absolutely find something in their public library that they object to, that doesn't align necessarily with their moral compass, but she makes the argument that just because you object to it does not give you the right to take away the right of other citizens of the community to read those materials if they feel that those are appropriate for their family and represent the voices and stories of the people that want to be heard. Okay? And so through this process, she's targeted by certain people within the community. One individual who lives within the community and another individual that lives outside the community that's just trying to raise a ruckus. And so she learns she has a horrible nightmare come true. She wakes up the next day after making these public comments at her board meeting and on social media and other online networking platforms. These two individuals are creating a windstorm of people to come attack her because of the words that she said that day. And I need to remind you that she's not the only one that said these words. We can all have our own opinions of it as somebody that works in the public library field. I personally believe that she was attacked because she is a public servant, she was working in the schools, and she's working with children, and she was vocal about the fact that she wanted to stick up for marginalized community members. And the smallest fraction of her community, not a group. Okay? So that's how the story starts, and obviously you can imagine that's a huge trauma for her. She's working through those dealings with her husband and her daughter. And so she goes through all these emotions. She's learning who her friends are in her community. She's learning who her family is. She's learning all these people that she grew up with, what side that they want to take on this particular relation. And it's heart-wrenching. I was telling Pauline before we got started, I waited to read this book until the holidays. And so this is really difficult for me as a librarian who's had to help libraries work through service challenges. to not only, even if I didn't work through service challenges, this is a tough book to read, but to have to like read through this and kind of relive some of these experiences was very difficult for me. So I felt for her. Like I heard her story, and what was even more interesting to me is I got to listen to Amanda speak at the New York Library Association conference. She was the keynote speaker, and I'll tell you, as an author, you can feel her and you can hear her in the words that she's providing in this book. The way that she comes across in this book is exactly the way that she came across in that keynote speech in person. Okay? And so basically, where it leaves at the end of this book is she takes the story to the First Circuit Louisiana Court of Appeals after 2 prior dismissals, where the case will be heard by 3 judges. And at the end, she ends the story on a very optimistic note, hoping that things will get better as things move forward. So I'm going to pause here and I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. All right? So, like most librarians, we fall into library work not because we intended to do that. I didn't grow up and say, hey, I want to be a public librarian someday. And I feel like most professionals could say that about themselves in whatever field they end up in. But I was fortunate enough to get my first work study job in my second year of college. My roommate hooked me up with a student assistant position in our large academic library at Florida Atlantic University. I ended up working there for 4 years. I got promoted just after my first semester where I got to work full time. It actually helped me pay for some of my undergraduate studies while I was working on my business degree. I quickly worked for corporate America for a little bit under 2 years, getting out of college, but decided it wasn't me, so I wanted to go back and become a public librarian because I loved the 4 years that I spent at FAU. And so in that time, I got to work as a director at David A. Hall Public Library for almost 3 years. And then when I graduated with my MLS from Syracuse, I was offered the position as a library director here just in our local area, Wellsville, New York, at the David A. Hall Public Library. And then I was there for about 8 years, and then I became the executive director of Southern Tier Library System. Okay, so this is kind of like a quick timeline of like how things shook out for me over the almost 30 years as a public librarian. Now I want to just quickly talk about my role, and this is certainly relevant to the story. And also, I like to use this opportunity to just brag about the work that I do. I have like one of the most unique jobs in New York State. There's only 22 other people in New York State that do what I do. There's 23 public library systems in New York State. So there's 23 public library system executive directors. So I'm just one of those 23. It is absolutely magical. Not only do I get to work with the amazing people in the greater Corning area of the Southeast Steuben County Library, I get to work with all the people at 47 other libraries in 47 other communities. I take a lot of pride in the fact that I can go to Allegheny, Chemung, Schuyler, Steuben, and the Yates counties. I can go to any one of those communities. I know at least a dozen people there. And you know, mostly they're from the library side. But I also get to work in local government. I work with a lot of towns, villages, cities, because a lot of those municipalities are connected to the work that libraries do. I also get to work with a lot of county governments. And the biggest thing that I enjoy doing the most is working with 44 library directors, one of them is here with us today, and a lot of trustees. There's about 300 trustees across all 48 of these libraries. They're all like you. They've got amazing stories, and they're advocates like Louise. They stand up and they make sure that the policies and the planning and the finances and the facilities are taken care of at the public library. So we can do all those things that uphold those democratic values that we all talked about at the beginning of this session. It is really an amazing job. I am blessed to do it in a lot of ways, or in some small ways I feel like I was absolutely meant to do this work. And I can tell you, as a member of your community, I absolutely care about your public libraries, and I want to make sure that they're thriving so that you have the resources that you need. Okay? Yeah, so why am I telling you guys this story? Like, how does this connect with the book? Like, some of you are probably like, well, that's very obvious. Like, this is a book about a librarian. You're a librarian. The reason why I want to share this with you is I've worked in libraries for almost 30 years. And the allegations that were made against Amanda Jones are just not true. And so I need you to understand, I have worked with hundreds of librarians across New York State, probably close to 1,000 if you include other states in the United States of America. None of them are pushing any type of agenda. What we do is we are hardworking public servants that care about the work that we do. We love taking care of children. We love making sure that they have the educational resources so that they can foster like a love for reading and knowledge. So they can go on and participate in our democratic society and be local law enforcement, be doctors, be lawyers, be accountants, be teachers, be whatever it is that their community needs so that we all can take care of each other, okay? And so people that work in our public libraries are amazing people. And they aren't what the smallest fraction of one community makes them out to be, okay? I need to be very clear about that. So for those of you that like started the book or read the book, would you mind just sharing with me why was it difficult to read? Pauline?
It just hits so close to home, and going through some of those experiences, but also constantly hearing about those experiences from librarians across the country. I was like, I can't do this.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? Yes? Yeah.
The sense that the bad guys were winning, that I read the first 3 chapters, and then I was thinking, is there any redemption at the end? So I skipped to the end, and it didn't seem to be. And I was like, I can't do it. I can't do it because the bad guys are winning once again.
They are and they aren't. Like, but when you get to the end of the book, like you see that, and I'm going to talk about this in just a minute. She finds her foundation. Like, she finds her ground, and she recognizes to like push back past that negativity. And as much as that stuff is going on, she learns that she's hearing from a lot more people about supporting the work that she's doing and raising her voice than those individuals are hearing from their communities. Okay, so it tells you that there is certainly a good imbalance of good versus evil. Okay. I just want to read this statement quickly. So, a review of federal charges for the past decade highlights that a number of threats to public officials is growing. While 2013 and 2016 had an average of 38 federal charges per year, that number sharply increased to an average of 62 charges per year between 2017 and 2022. Across the time series, ideological motivated threats, on average, accounted for almost half of the cases, and the portion steadily increased from year to year. A preliminary review of cases from 2023 and 2024, so current data, shows that the number of federal prosecutions is on pace to hit new record highs. The rising threat level may produce significant consequences for the U.S. democratic system of governance. Now, this comes from the Center for Combating Terrorism from West Point. Okay, and this is just one study of many studies. I also promise you that this is the last downer thing that I'm going to do. We're going to head on an upward trajectory from here. But what I want you to share, and we see this in the news every day, okay? So it's not just like librarians, it's not just educators, it's not library trustees and school administrators or school board members, it's elected officials too. So I think it's a reminder for us, going back to that first question I asked you about why is this conversation so important, that when there's a time for us to raise our voices, we really need to do it, okay? And I promise you, as somebody that's always focused on glass is always 3/4 full and always trying to be optimistic, we're going to move forward and it's going to be okay. So I'm going to focus on 3 sections of the book that I really think are good and were helpful to me getting through some of that toughness, all right? Again, looking at that glass being 3/4 full. How we got here. This is chapter number 2. This is it. This is her in that public meeting, sharing her public comments, reading that speech that was in the appendices, word for word. Even though she woke up the next morning to the worst possible nightmare for any librarian or public servant, we need to take confidence in the fact that checks and balances are placed. We are afforded the opportunity to provide those public comments. If our society ever comes to a point in time where we're not afforded those opportunities, I think that's when we really need to worry. But because we're in a place right now where any one of us in this room, regardless of backgrounds, beliefs, or partisan ideologies, we can walk into a public space before our public officials, and hopefully all of us are extremely respectful, and we talk with our elected officials about what we want most within our community and what we believe is our values as American citizens. We have that right now. It is not gone, and we can look across the world and the globe, and we know that that is not necessarily the case for all countries. Those freedoms and those rights are actually being taken away from previously held democratic institutions. We should have that. We should hold that with high regard in terms of something we should be proud of as Americans. So that's number 1. Number 2 is chapter 6. Hell hath no fury like a librarian scorn. This is that point in the book where she finds that foundation. If you got to chapter 6, she got past the haters. She got to the point where she's like, I'm not going on social media. I'm not reading this email. I'm deleting. I'm moving past that. I'm recognizing the fact that like, that I can do this. I believe in something. I knew that going back to the beginning of time since I started this work, I believe in something. I can move forward. I can drown out any of the noise that I hear from those haters, and that I can move on. And I think all of us grapple with this. I know that I grapple with this through my work. Like when I started out as a public librarian, I had a really great mentor for me at the time, and he told me, he's like, don't just like go out there and like, you know, run libraries, or don't just go out there and try to like operate libraries. Like believe in them, fight for them. Like go out there and raise your voice and make sure that they are here for the next several generations and they never go away. And she's doing this in that chapter. Like she is recognizing she's been given a platform and she is going to use it. Okay? So that's another like glass of 3/4. So the last part, and I'm just going to read this verbatim, is in the appendices, and this comes directly from the speech that she shared. Just because you enter a library, it does not mean you will see something you do not like. Libraries have diverse collections with resources from many points of view, and a library's mission is to provide access to information for all users. All library users have the First Amendment right to borrow, read, view, and listen to library resources. And that comes directly from the American Library Association. Each family has the right to determine which library resources are acceptable for its own children, but individuals must also realize that they must be afforded the same rights to all other parents. What I loved about reading this is that, I'm going to talk about it in just a moment, 2 of our libraries received service challenges back in December of 2023 in Allegheny County. And one of those libraries was the library, it's one of my local libraries where I live, so I was afforded the opportunity to provide public comment. And while I was familiar with Amanda's case, I didn't read this speech. But I can tell you there are multiple sections from her speech that are almost exactly the same as the speech that I made. And if you had to sit during those public comment sessions for either one of those 2 libraries, not only was this narrative used for my speech, but it was used for a lot of other community members that came to the table to speak up on behalf of the librarians and the library trustees to make sure that those materials stayed on the shelves. And it reminded me that like public librarianship or librarianship in general is a profession. Like if I'm talking with any librarians in the room, at some point in time when you were going through your studies and you were learning your craft and you were making mistakes and having failures and you were reading the literature, you picked up on this. Like I said earlier on, I said all of us will find something in our library that we disagree with, but that doesn't give us the right to go into that library and say, hey, that needs to come off the shelf. There are really good policies in place to make certain that we as individuals have that opportunity to go do that and voice our concerns. That doesn't mean the library board of trustees has to take those materials off the shelf. So this is like my other feel-good moment. I was just like, yeah, like clearly like librarians don't have an agenda. We are brought through or we are vetted through this very professional process to make certain that we are holding on to some very critical core values that when we're asked to make very specific decisions about the work that we do, they're consistent from one situation to the next. Okay, so we're not favoring one member of our community over another member of our community. We're making certain all people receive equal rights based on their constitution. All right. So those are the 3 sections that I really like. So I just mentioned the fact that 2 service challenges took place in our libraries. If you went back prior to 2021, service challenges are a thing in libraries. They happen all the time. Like normally, it's a concerned parent of a young child that's coming in and they don't like Harry Potter. And they're just like, hey, how do I like just at least vent about this to library administration? And so typically they would fill out the challenge to library materials form, they give it to the person that's working behind the circulation desk or at the reference desk, and that individual library worker would pass it on to the library director, who would like do some research, determine whether or not that title or author is valid for that community member to push back on whether or not she's in the collection. They go through actual peer-reviewed professional reviews of that literature to make sure that like other people within other fields that are connected to information are saying, yeah, this is like a valid piece of information, it's truthful, it's factual, and it deserves to be on a library shelf. So like that was the thing before 2021, but then 2021 hit and something happened with our polarized environment where normally across the country we receive about 400 service challenges to unique titles per year. That skyrocketed in 2021 to about 1,200. Okay, and same for 2022, 2023, And we just ended 2024, so it'll be interesting, or sadly interesting, to find out where the numbers are at. So there's something going on in our political environment. And like, I can tell you, I've worked in the system now for 20 years. I think if I went back 15 or 20 years ago and a material was challenged like it was here at these two libraries, I don't think you would have seen 300 people in the crowd over it, okay? So it gives you a general idea of like where people are at in terms of their concerns about what's on the library shelves, but also concerns about making certain that things that are on the library shelves stay on the library shelves for very good reasons. What I want to share with you about the story is, so both of these libraries received service challenges. It is important to note that the materials that were being challenged were stories and voices of the LGBTQIA+ community. No other stories or authors from those collections, specifically those titles. Okay? And the folks that were challenging those materials wanted to make that very clear in those public comment sessions. Okay? 300 folks combined showed up between the two sessions, about 250 for the second one, 100 for the first one. It's a little over 300. The ratios were great. So for the first session, it was about 3 to 1. 3 folks for every 1 person that spoke was in favor of keeping materials on the shelf and supported the library board. The second one was 2 to 1, which is the Keep a Circulating Library, which is that library, that public board meeting right there. The library boards did the right thing. They kept those materials on the shelves and they kept them in the exact locations of where they were when they were questioned. It's a win, okay? And I can tell you, as somebody that goes through this experience, remember when I talked a little bit about like my role in libraries? Whenever something good happens in libraries, I get to see it. On a surface level, I know what's going on in all 48 of our libraries right now for the most part. Not all the details, but I know for the most part what's going on in those libraries. When things don't go so good, I hear about it really quickly. I'm probably one of the first people to get the phone call and say, hey, so we're in this situation, how do we work through it? And so I was really close and intimate with these two situations, understanding every detail that was taking place. I had to read the service challenge forms. They were tough. They were based in hate and discrimination. They were so tough. Okay, and then I'm going to be very clear. Like some of the librarians and the folks that were receiving communication, you know, it was tough to read. Okay, but I want us to walk away from this conversation with knowing that this was a win. This was a win for our community, regardless of partisan beliefs. I can tell you, folks from both sides of the aisle showed up and supported these libraries. And I think that's something we can take a lot of pride in for our community. At the end of the day, our democratic values and the First Amendment won, and we'll continue to make that happen. So the current situation, like I said, you can Google it, and I just did. So Amanda, the third case got thrown out, but now the Louisiana Supreme Court ruled that they were going to allow it to be heard once more. And here's the winner of it. Here's the even more positive news. The burden of proof is no longer on Amanda. The burden of proof is now on the harassers. And that is a wonderful thing, because she shouldn't have to prove this case, even though she's done an amazing job of doing so. So that's the other one. And the only thing I know, if you did get to this part in the book, all she wants is a buck and apology. Like, after all that she's gone through, she's not making any money on this thing. She wants $1 and an apology. That is it. So she also offers up some recommendations about what you can do when libraries get into these situations. You know, obviously, if there's a public comment session taking place at your library, please attend. Because if you don't feel like speaking up, at least attend to be there as a supporter. You can contact your local library board or friends of the library and ask how you can get involved with your library. We always need people that will serve as trustees on behalf of libraries. You can contribute to the New York Library Association's Legal Defense Fund. This is a fund that gets pulled together, so whenever a library gets in a sticky situation, like Amanda's public library, those funds are available to those libraries to be able to fight those cases. And then obviously, I think Amanda mentioned this in the book as well, the ALA is Freedom to Read Foundation. Okay. So like any good librarian, these are my references. I don't want to take credit for anybody's work, and I want to make sure any work that was included in this presentation is getting the credit that it deserves. I'm going to open it up for questions in just a moment, but I want to end on this note. Like I said, I had the opportunity to see Amanda speak, and her voice comes through in this book. She represents who she is and what she stands for, and I think that is something that we don't always see of public servants in today's society. There's amazing public servants out there that are doing really good work, and Amanda is like the prime example of like what that should look like. The other thing I want to share with you is that I do recommend that you read it. It is a tough read. like I said, it was a little bit of a downer on my holiday vacation, but it was important for me as a librarian to have to go through that process again, and process it for not only so that I can come to you and talk to you a little bit about it, but it's like, it's something you can't turn away and not look at. It's not something you can not engage with. So you really gotta like understand that when somebody issues a service challenge at a library or at a school district, it has consequences. Like, we can't be naive about that. So it's really important that, like, when it comes to the First Amendment right, we all do our very best to uphold it. And I can tell you right now, public libraries were absolutely intended to be a pillar of this democracy, and it's important that we have them here for many, many years to come. So with that being said, thank you very much for your support, and I really enjoyed being here with you today.
Questions, comments?
A question.
Yeah.
Years ago, I looked up how many libraries there are in different states. And I was amazed that New York had a hell of a lot of libraries compared to others.
Yep.
You are giving this talk in the context of New York State. Let's say it applies. What have you learned about other states' libraries?
We're really lucky here in New York State. We have a robust library infrastructure, so like I said, I'm with the public library system, but then you have your local libraries. We also have library councils that help library systems. We also have a state library. If you go to more rural states, like just some of the come off the top of my head, like Montana, South Dakota, North Dakota, they don't have library systems. So the local library, in order to receive any levels, like any type of higher level support, they go to their state library. You know, there's some states right now that are looking to completely cut their state library out of the equation. So those local libraries will be all on their own. We do. I think we have the second most libraries of any state in the U.S. I think California has us beat. I have to go back and look at the data just to confirm. But you're right. Like, we're in the top 3 in terms of number of libraries. And here's where I'm going to give a shout out to all of the grandmothers, mothers, sisters in the room. We have public libraries in this region because of women. Like, because of women's reading clubs that back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, they put pressure on a lot of the people that were empowered to create public libraries. We would not have that many public libraries in New York State if it wasn't for the women that live in the state.
Can I finish my next 2 questions were, I read not the whole book because I got very frustrated with the way the town reacted. What do you want to call it, the negativity, I realized that to learn in many cases, you have to be comfortable with anxiety, or being comfortable with being uncomfortable, because you got to read things which are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I couldn't get through this one,
Yeah.
just because of the nature of the population around it.
Yeah. I can understand that, and I empathize with that. But the reason why I make that argument is like that's part of our job. Is like you've got to hear you got to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes. You've got to be able to hear other perspectives, even if you don't want to hear it, because like that's the only way we go forward. And hopefully we can get back to a place where we find more common ground on things. And I do believe as a nation there are far more things that unite us than divide us. But we need to start having those conversations. It starts by like leaning into some things that make us uncomfortable. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that there are some optimistic things here. I'm going to have thinking of going back and finishing it, I don't know, when I'm feeling stronger. But I wanted to ask, with the incoming administration, are there things that we need to be paying attention to in particular, or appointments of people that we need to kind of look at? What are we looking at for libraries?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I preface it with none of this is rooted in partisanship. So, you know, we can just look back at data and history. And so, like in the incoming administration, in all 4 years, they look to cut the Institute for Museum and Library Services, which is like a feeder program for our state libraries across the United States. And obviously, the state libraries within the United States provide amazing services to the library systems. and local libraries. So I think like when you hear that federal like sounding bell that like the Institute for Museum and Library Services are being cut, or even potentially the education department, like those are things that like, hey, like we need to, you know, write to our local Congress and Senate folks to let them know that's just not okay and that's not acceptable to us. So I think that's one. I think the other thing, just the conversation we're having here today, you know, I do think the polarization of America is part of the reason why, or is a big reason why we're seeing these spikes in service challenges. And I need to reiterate, it's like the smallest fraction of our community. Like, you know, it's folks that just have this ideology that they can't let go. Okay, so we need to like lean into all those other community members. You know, I can't put a percentage to it, but it's the majority of community members that they're rational and they recognize that we have to uphold the First Amendment. So, again, going back to service challenges, like if you know that your library or your school district is under attack, with these types of things, show up. Like those are the two things I can tell you right now. Yeah.
To respond to her question, there is a very specific threat to libraries coming up. It will happen on September 16th, 2016, 3 weeks before the next federal elections. That date marks the end of the 10-year term of the current Librarian of Congress. For those of you who do not understand it, the Librarian of Congress works for and reports to Congress, but is appointed by the President of the United States. Now, if you think that I'm crazy to think that a Marjorie Taylor Greene could be the next Librarian of Congress, think about how fast they pushed Amy Coney Barrett through to the Supreme Court. What happens at the Library of Congress ripples down throughout the entire library profession. There's not much we can do in this state because our 2 senators will definitely oppose any of Trump's appointments, and he seems to revel in appointing people who are specifically out to kill the agency that they're in charge of. So, I mean, I literally lose sleep over that at night, wondering, I am so furious that the current librarian on November 6th did not tender her resignation so that Biden could have pushed a new appointment through while the Democrats still control the Senate, because the approval is done by the Senate, not the entire Congress.
One thing, I would have to fact check that. Is it a requirement for the Library of Congress to have done MLS?
No,
No.
no.
No,
Uh,
not all of them. That's
Borston
great.
did not have an MLS.
Yeah.
Billington did not have an MLS. Archibald McLeish did not have an MLS.
Thank you for educating me.
Yeah.
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 Knowing the political climate,
Oh, 2026, I'm sorry.
but knowing the political climate and what it is and what it's going to be, when you have people that are fighting again, fighting for banning books, and they're using the First Amendment right to say, I have the right to say that this is banned, but yet it's a contradiction of sorts to say, well, I have the right to say no, but other people have that equal right to say yes. So it's such a contradiction. Do you think, personal belief, do you think it's more of lack of education for people that are fighting for that, or the desire to have power and jump on a political bandwagon?
Yeah.
As opposed to really saying, I hate this book.
I don't think it's a lack of education. I think that would be not the most proper term. I think a lot of folks that are trying to fight these fights are actually very well educated. I think the challenge is sometimes where their information is coming from. And so, like, or just what they've known all their entire life and what their belief systems are. We know behaviors and beliefs are the 2 hardest things to change. So I believe that most people that are trying to fight these fights in terms of challenging books is they are well educated, they are well informed. I just don't know the quality of the information that they're receiving is actually the thing that is best for them in terms of how they're making their arguments.
I think too that the the sense of they're doing something righteous to protect is a very strong driving factor.
Yeah.
You know, it's that feeling that I'm doing this, I'm just in doing this because we're protecting the children. That, I mean, and it gives them the passion for it.
The motivation
The
is good,
motivation.
it's just not necessarily.
Yeah.
Well, plus the fact that a lot of these people have never read the books they want to read.
Well, you make a good point. They sell things in the words of altruism.
Yes.
Altruism is how you sell things, and, oh, I'm trying to make it better for you.
Yeah,
It's a good sales pitch.
yeah.
But it's not true.
Not bad for them.
I think, and Amanda touches on that in her book too, because I think it was very kind of her to share that side of it, that she felt like that side thought that they were being altruistic and that they were being helpful, and that drives their motivation to do that. So I'll say something that she tells me at the end of this book not to say. I am a public school librarian. This book, I could cry just talking right now, is a complete emotional roller coaster. But I think it was the drive that I needed to make more friends. So I feel like if anybody leaves with if you haven't finished the book, if I could make it through it as a public education as a librarian, because there were times where I was like, she's being too nice, and then other times I'm like, oh no, don't get back on Facebook. Like, it went back and forth, and at the end, I was a little bit upset if you got to the end, because she lists the things not to do. Take your job title off of your social media sites. But she does say, like, reach out and make good connections, and that's the piece that I'm gonna hold on to. She says don't, and she did not, just for the record, did not mention that she was a librarian in a public school in her speech, not once. It is not why she was there to speak. She spoke as a citizen of the community. So I came for multiple reasons, because this is the Amanda Jones. Like, if you are a librarian, you know Amanda Jones. She is the Amanda Jones. But just to like bridge those two pieces, like, I think it made me realize that maybe there aren't as many connections as I hoped there would be between our neighborhood libraries and our school libraries, because we are dealing with this, we're all dealing with the same things, and I think this topic is not going away.
Yeah, I don't think the topic's going away anytime soon, and that's part of the reason why, like, we've been talking about, like, this is not the first time that I've talked about it in a public setting. And you know, that's part of my job, is just trying to get people with actual information on these issues, and hopefully, you know, bring people together around it. But you know, I think your network would grow much quicker than you think if you were put in this type of a situation. She was out there proactively connecting with folks through her professional associations, international associations, but that was something that we learned through the 2 service challenges really quickly. If the two librarians or directors were here in this room, they would share with you that, like, they received a huge outpouring of support and love from people they don't even know. Like they just, you know, they were getting emails from, you know, all sides from the community just saying, hey, thank you so much for what you do. We agree with your decision making. You know, and they certainly received some not so great communication as well, but it certainly, again, it was far more positive communication, just like Amanda's situation, far more positive communication than the negative. Lindsay?
Yeah, back to some of the earlier questions. I think it was the Washington Post, I'd have to double check, published something a couple years ago about how a disproportionately large number of books being banned or challenged in schools are coming from a very small percentage of the population, like an incredibly small percentage of the population. And so this idea of large organizations like disseminating information that can then be copied and pasted and sent to your local school, I think that is to account for a lot of the uptick in just the number of challenges that we're seeing across the country. But the thing that those groups underestimate is like the top-down problems are real problems, but the bottom-up is where we see the real solutions.
Yeah.
So it's like the communities that come together, and you don't really see that until those problems occur. So,
And to support what you're saying, some town, they had 106 books that people had wanted banned from their library. And what they had done is they got a couple of people from the library, a couple of people who, they made sure all the books were read. They found a lot of times people had read them. And they had these people, these groups, read the books, and then discuss them, and then decide whether these books should be banned or not. And they ended up banning 2 out of 106. You know, after people learned and got somewhat educated, just didn't accept somebody else's opinion. And we seem to think opinions are fact,
Yeah.
and opinions are not fact.
Thank you for sharing.
But we gotta lose some of our own.
So,
Frank over there wants to.
Frank has something.
Sure.
Can you name some of the books or authors that are most under attack, either mentioned by her or from your own experience?
I can't name specific titles or authors, there's quite a few. I have some of the other librarians in the room if you want to provide some titles and authors, but like in terms of like stories, storytelling and genres, mostly books rooted in the stories of LGBTQ plus IA community members, as well as stories told by Black authors, Indigenous folks, as well as people of color.
They come out with a list every year of the top banned books for the year that you can look up, and they are turning more that direction every year. I'd say almost the entire top 10 list.
Is Tom Sawyer still on it?
No, that's fallen off. It's not a worry, it's not a concern anymore, apparently.
Yes, Louise.
So, it's more of a comment. I was able to go to the challenge that Cuba Library faced. And they did an amazing job of managing the meeting and having people heard. They had very strict rules and so forth as to how long people could speak and that kind of thing. But what struck me at the end of it was there was a small group of people there together who were opposing the book. And the people who spoke in support of the, and so they were sort of homogenous, right? The people who spoke supporting the library and against the censorship were an amazingly diverse group of people. I mean, they were each there as an individual to say, this is my experience, this is why it's important to me. So there were young people and older people and people from all walks of life. It was really impressive and extremely heartening to hear them speak.
Thank you all very much for letting me be here with you today.